That brings me to a set of questions I have for you, Jimmy, because
Okay.
you are known for solving mysteries. So I assembled 5 mysteries of the 4th of July, and I want you.
Okay.
And in my research, I did actual research for this to come up with
Mm,
mysteries for the 4th of July. I think I was vaguely aware of this, but I did not realize quite how powerful the debate is about whether a hot dog is a sandwich. Now, that's not one of the
mhm.
mysteries, but this is just a fact that I ran into. So I'm just springing this on you. Do you have an opinion about it? It's not a mystery. It's an opinion
I,
thing. Is a
I
hot
I
dog a
think
sandwich?
I think it depends on how you define sandwich.
Yeah.
It's kind of an open face sandwich with the bun serving as a single piece of bread, but it's going to depend on whether you're using a definition that specifies particular elements or whether you're using a prototype definition where some objects resemble um, a prototype example
Yeah.
more than others,
Right.
whereas they may have the same elements. So, for example, penguins are birds based on their, you know, uh, anatomical
Yeah.
classification. But people, if you say, imagine a bird, most people are not going to think of a penguin. They're going to
Right.
think of like a robin or a starlin or something like that, which
Yeah.
are more prototypical of what people consider birds to be. So if you define a hot dog by its parts, it's an open faced sandwich. So is a pizza.
Oh yeah.
But
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
yeah, but if you define it based on its prototype, the prototype of of what we imagine a sandwich to be, you could say it's not.
That's excellent. But the thing is, if someone said to me, "I'm gonna have a hot dog sandwich," I would assume they're getting 2 pieces of bread and they're chopping that hot dog up and making a sandwich out of it. It doesn't immediately strike. Well, anyway, that's my. All right,
Yeah.
here's 5 mysteries. So mystery one, because you are the mystery man, you solve mysteries for people. And so here's my first mystery of the 4th of July. What's in a hot dog?
Well, it depends on the hot dog. They are made quite differently. Some of them are made of beef, some of them are made of pork. Some of them are made of chicken. Some of them are made of turkey. Some of them are made of a combination of those meats. Because hot dogs are a ground sausage product, that means you don't have to focus on the more choice cuts of
Oh,
of
right.
of these animals. You can use, scrap meat, and it's all going to get ground up anyway. I have seen various forms of pork products. If you're, at least I've seen them here in Arkansas. I don't know if you see them in California so much. You can tell me, but there are various pork products that will be labeled whole hog, and that's where they take basically the entire hog and grind it up.
Oh,
In addition to the meat that's in a hot dog, they also include various spices like salt and various, other kinds of spices. They include preservatives to make the meat last longer on the shelf. They may include things like water and corn syrup and modified food starch.
I'm
And
just.
then there are veggie dogs, which are made out of veggies.
I'm just so glad the answer was not Jimmy Hoffa. All right, that's mystery number mystery number one. We all love the fireworks of the 4th of July. Who invented fireworks, Jimmy?
Well, I hate to burst your bubble if you were hoping me to mention an American, but fireworks have been around for centuries longer than America has. And actually, they were first, so far as we know, invented in China. As early as the 2nd century BC, Chinese individuals were making firecrackers. And, they had invented gunpowder. They didn't use it for guns, but they had invented gunpowder and they used it for things like firecrackers, and then they got more pyrotechnic effects, and so it kind of grew from there.
Did you say BC?
Yeah, 2nd century BC.
Wow. Wow. They are Ch- China, you are ahead of your time. All right. How does sunscreen work? That's mystery number 3 of the 4th of July. How does it work?
Okay, there are two types of sunscreen. One kind blocks the ultraviolet radiation coming from our star, the sun, and these sun blocks use minerals like zinc oxide and titanium oxide to block the ultraviolet radiation. So that's one type of sunscreen. The other type of sunscreen doesn't block the rays, but it absorbs and the rays and converts them into heat, which is then dissipated from the skin. And substances that do this include these absorbers, include things like avobenzone and oxybenzone.
Which one's better? I don't know which one. I feel like if I put on the zinc one, I'm now reflecting the rays onto the person next to me, and I'm making the situation worse for them. I'm I'm creating a worse sunburn for the person next to me.
I would suspect that that the direct rays they're getting from the sun are going to be much more potent than anything reflecting off of your zinc oxide.
All right, two major ones, and I will say number 5 is the I think it's the predominant mystery of the 4th of July, and we're going to get to that momentarily. But Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is the podcast. Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin is something we do all the time. Jimmy Akin is the mystery solver, so I've got mysteries of the 4th of July for Jimmy. Bald eagles, Jimmy, are they really bald?
No, bald eagles are not bald. Their head is covered with feathers, just like the rest of their body, but they have a distinctive marking where they will have white feathers on their heads compared to brown feathers on the rest of their bodies, and consequently they're not really bald at all. If we were naming them more literally, we might call them white-headed eagles rather than bald eagles. But they are not bald. It's just they kind of maybe sort of kind of ish look bald, given that we think of most eagles being brown, and these guys have this white patch on their head, so they, I guess, figuratively look bald, but they're actually not bald at all.
I'm glad to hear that, because there are some birds that are bald. There are birds that don't have feathers on their head, and they're weird looking. No offense, birds. No, I'm so sorry, California condor. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. Jimmy, this is the greatest mystery of the 4th of July. It's entirely unsolved. So if you solve this, then we will change the whole history and trajectory of the country. The Continental Congress was actually not a Continental Congress. It was a Continental Congress. Why?
Oh.
Why did they use the letter F when they clearly needed to use the letter S?
Okay, so they're not actually using the letter F. English, like a few other languages, including Greek, has more than one typographical form or handwritten form for the letter S. You see this in Greek all the time. There's a difference between the sigmas that you see on the front of a word or in the middle of a word and the sigma that you'll see on the end of the word, which is known as the final sigma. It's all the letter S, but it's written a different way. And the same thing is true of the letter S in German, at least historically, and also in English historically. So if you think about that weird letter that looks like an F, but it's where you'd expect an S, that's what's known as a long S. It's like you take the letter S and you stretch it out vertically. And so it is the letter S. It's just stretched out in such a way that it looks like the letter F. And the long S was used in handwriting and in typography between the 8th and the 19th century. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, people would start confusing it with the letter F, and so it gradually fell out. Originally, it was used in specific positions in the word, just like in Greek. The long S was used, for example, in the middle of a word or at the beginning of a word, and the short S that we're familiar with now was used at the end of a word, just like final sigma was in Greek.
Thank you, Jimmy, for solving my great mysteries of the 4th of July. Happy 4th of July to everybody listening. We're going to take a very quick break, and we will come back with lots of questions for Jimmy that have come in from the internet. It is a holiday, and I want to especially welcome those who, because you're working at this time, or maybe you're in a different geographic location, this is the first time you're catching us. Catholic Answers Live is it is exactly what it says it is. We just answer questions about the Catholic faith, and if you want to find out about us, you can go to our website, Catholic.com, and we're glad you're here. Thanks for listening. Right back with more Ask Me Anything, internet variety with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catch Catholic Answers Live anytime at Catholic.com.
Are you looking to study Catholic theology in a formal way with the guidance of faithful scholars? Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by the Augustine Institute, offering master's degrees in theology, pastoral theology, and Catholic education with flexible study options on campus, online, or both. The Augustine Institute equips students to serve Christ and His Church in schools, parishes, dioceses, apostolates, and the home. Learn more today at augustine.edu.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 2011. EWTN acquires the National Catholic Register, the nation's leading Catholic newspaper, the latest in the network's efforts to expand its news presence in the global Catholic digital and multimedia market.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, and happy Independence Day to you. Jimmy Akin is our guest both hours. It's an internet show. All the questions have come already to us from the internet, and we've gathered them up here, and we're going to ask Jimmy Akin those questions. And I'll start with Malulani, 056, who wants to know, why do you hate the traditional Latin Mass?
I don't hate the traditional Latin Mass. I support the traditional Latin Mass. I cheered when Benedict XVI liberalized its celebration. I was very disappointed when Pope Francis restricted it further. I'm glad it's still available to people, and I hope that Pope Leo re-liberalizes its celebration. So I don't know who you've been listening to. I know there are people out there who seem to enjoy deliberately misrepresenting what I think and try to portray me as if I'm not a friend of tradition when in fact I am. So I figured this would be a good question to just clear the air a little bit. I don't oppose the traditional Latin Mass at all. I think it's part of the wonderful diversity of different liturgical celebrations that Christ has put in his church. You know, we have all of the different Eastern rites, we have variations on the Latin rite, and I'm in favor of them all. I think they're all wonderful and they all glorify God.
Malu, thank you very much for the question. Next one comes from Michael. Okay, let me get this correct. Did Christ always have a human nature, or did God change and gain a human nature at the moment of the incarnation? What is the best language to describe this mystery?
Okay, so one of the things that the church teaches about the divine nature is it exists outside of time, and therefore it cannot change. It is immutable, to use a Latin-based word for it. So since Christ, the Son of God, became incarnate in time, and time is where change occurs. Any time that we speak of any change that occurs we must speak of as occurring in time, not in eternity, which is outside of time. So the Son of God spans both eternity, which is outside of the flow of time, and time itself. So you got to pick your frame of reference, as Herr Dr. Einstein taught us. If you pick eternity as your frame of reference, then God does not change. And so from the eternal perspective, the Son of God has, quote unquote, always had, this is an eternal always, has always had a human nature. That human nature begins at a certain moment in time, let's say 2 or 3 BC, and then continues forward from there. But from the static eternal now outside of time, he's always had this nature, and it begins at a certain moment in time. If you flip that around and look at the situation, if you pick time as your frame of reference, then if you ask in, let's say, 10 BC, does the Son of God have a human nature now, meaning now in 10 BC? The answer is no. And that will continue to be the answer until you get up to 2 or 3 BC, when the answer is going to change to yes. So from a perspective inside of time, there is a change that occurs, whereas where the Son of God does not have a human nature before a certain point and does have a human nature after that point. But from eternity as your frame of reference, he just always has a human nature that begins in 3 or 2 BC and continues thereafter.
Oh, wow. Michael, thank you very much for the question. The next question comes from, I don't think I can do Homer. It comes from Duff Beer. Duff Beer asks, if we interpret Genesis as describing God's creation of man through evolution, and the flood as describing a population bottleneck thousands or hundreds of thousands of years before Genesis was recorded, is it possible that the author incorporated contemporary myths into the writing of Genesis? There are Mesopotamian flood myths that predate the writing of Genesis by at least 100 years, likely inspired by the flooding of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. If God revealed to me the knowledge of a battle between good and evil, I might visualize it as an Avengers-style fight or a Lord of the Rings-style battle because of my contemporary culture. Would it be acceptable to think the writer of Genesis did the same thing, using a popular myth that already existed when Genesis was being recorded to convey why God destroyed the wicked and created the covenant, even if the means God used were different in prehistory?
Okay, so I want to make sure we're clear on what Duff Beer is proposing here. He's assuming that we're interpreting Genesis as describing a population bottleneck that occurred thousands or hundreds of thousands of years before Genesis. And what he's asking is, if that's what Genesis is talking about, could the author of Genesis have described that population bottleneck? A population bottleneck is when a large part of a population dies off. So it's like all the genetic material that survives has to go through this smaller number of people, which is why it's called a bottleneck. But he's asking, could an earlier population bottleneck have been described in terms of stories that were told in Mesopotamia that were likely based on the flooding of the Tigris and the Euphrates, which is a well-known phenomenon that happens over there? Well, personally, I don't think that Genesis should be interpreted in terms of a population bottleneck that occurred hundreds of thousands of years earlier. I don't think that there is any plausible mechanism for the societies to have transmitted information about such a population bottleneck up to the time Genesis was written, about 1000 BC. I think whatever Genesis is describing, it's much more recent than that. But we can go with Duff Beer's framing of the issue. So if Genesis is describing a much earlier population bottleneck, could the author of Genesis have taken more recent events or stories and used them to depict that population bottleneck, the same way that he says he might envision a fight between good and evil as something you'd see in the Avengers or a Lord of the Rings movie. Well, we actually have a discussion of the extent to which Genesis might incorporate prior popular stories. This comes from Pope Pius XII's encyclical Humanae Generis, which was released in 1950, 75 years ago. And things have shifted some since Humanae Generis was released 75 years ago, but the same fundamental principles are going to apply. So if you look in sections 38 and 39 of Humanae Generis, Pope Pius XII says this. He says, the first 11 chapters of Genesis, although properly speaking not conforming to the historical method used by the best Greek and Latin writers or by competent authors of our time, do nevertheless pertain to history in a true sense, which, however, must be further studied and determined by exegetes, which is what's been happening in the last 75 years. The same chapters in simple and metaphorical language adapted to the mentality of a people but little cultured, both state the principal truths which are fundamental for our salvation and also give a popular description of the origin of the human race and the chosen people. If, however, the ancient sacred writers have taken anything from popular narrations, and this may be conceded, Pius XII says. So he's conceding the author of Genesis may have taken material from popular narrations. It must never be forgotten that they did so with the help of divine inspiration, through which they were rendered immune from any error in selecting and evaluating those documents. Therefore, whatever of the popular narrations have been inserted into the sacred scriptures must in no way be considered on par with the myths or other such things, which are more the product of an extravagant imagination than of that striving for the truth and simplicity, which in the sacred books, also of the Old Testament, is so apparent that our ancient sacred writers must be admitted to be clearly superior to the ancient profane writers. So he's saying that the author of Genesis, especially in the first 11 chapters, may have taken stuff from popular narrations. He doesn't call them myths that would have a pejorative connotation that he wants to avoid. But there were narrations or stories, as I called them, about great floods. In the Mesopotamian context, there's, like the equivalent of Noah was a guy named Utnapishtim. And so there were stories about Utnapishtim and how he survived the Great Flood. In Greek, now this is later, but in Greek stories, there was Deucalion, who was the survivor of the Great Flood. And what Pope Pius XII is saying is that the author of Genesis may have used earlier narrations like those coming from Babylonia, but in the process of incorporating them into sacred scripture, he was protected by divine inspiration. So I would say that the answer to Duff Beer's question is yes, these texts could have been influenced by earlier stories about a great flood and how people survived it, the same way that he's proposing that you might have an earlier population bottleneck that then gets depicted in these in terms of more recent stories. So I would say the basic answer to his question is yes, it could have happened this way, but personally, I don't think Genesis is talking about something that happened hundreds of thousands of years earlier, but if you do, you do you.
Yeah, good advice for Duff Beer. Duff Beer, thank you very much for the question. Lots more questions to come. We've got the internet, because it's made by people, has endless questions. And so we will get to more of those questions with Jimmy Akin right after this on Catholic Answers Live. We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun. And that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Deepen your connection to the Church's holy days and seasons while you draw on the wisdom of the Church Fathers. Feasts of Our Fathers, the new book from Mike Aquilina and Adam Lucas, is a treasury of history, prayers, insights, and lessons that will bring you closer to the earliest of Catholic traditions. Take your prayer life and your solidarity with the Church, past and present, to a new level. Order your copy of Feasts of Our Fathers today at shop.catholic.com.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Happy Independence Day to you. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and we've got lots of internet questions for today. Jimmy, we started by asking Jimmy some of the mysterious, to solve some mysteries of the 4th of July for us. And part of why we think of Jimmy as a mystery solver is that he's got hundreds of episodes of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and a new one drops each Friday. And it being Friday, do you drop episodes on holidays as well, Jimmy?
Oh, yeah. I don't let holidays stop me.
And so what dropped today on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
Today's episode looks at the second most famous equation in science. Now, the most famous equation is Albert Einstein's E = mc squared. But second to that, there's what's known as the Drake equation. And the Drake equation was produced in the 1960s by an astronomer named Frank Drake. And it deals with the how many technological civilizations may be out there in the galaxy currently that we could communicate with. And you can try to calculate this by figuring out certain factors, like how often do new stars form, how many of these stars have planets, how many of those planets are habitable, how many of the habitable planets develop in life, how many planets with life develop intelligence, and how many planets with intelligent life develop technology that we could communicate with, and then how long do those civilizations survive? So there's a lot of interesting stuff that you could figure out if you could pin down those numbers that you need to plug into those variables. And we've learned quite a bit more about some of the variables since the 1960s. So I go through the Drake equation. I talk about how it came about. I talk about what was known in the 1960s when the original estimates were done, and then what we've learned since then and what that may say about, are there people out there that we could actually communicate with?
Oh, fascinating. All right. So you're taking on the Drake equation. I would guess that if you went back to the 1960s, they would think there are fewer planets in the galaxy than we currently think. It seems to me like we've been amazed at how many planets there are.
That is one of the things that has shifted. Yes, back in the 1960s, when the Drake equation was first created, they thought most stars probably didn't have planets, and since then we've learned nope, there are about as many planets as there are stars. Every star seems to have at least one planet.
There's always one. There's always one planet. let's go back to the question. Check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, though. Check it out at mysterious.fm. Check it out at Jimmy's YouTube channel, the Jimmy Akin channel on YouTube, where you can also get the Jimmy Akin podcast, where he tackles mysteries of the faith each Monday. So you get a mystery to begin and end the work week if you subscribe to the Jimmy Akin channel on YouTube. Shalom wants to know this. Why did the church go from severe fasting to weekly fasting to weekly abstinence? And now in the U.S., some other penance can substitute for abstinence. There are currently only 2 days a year of actual fasting and abstinence that are required in the U.S. Is this a good or bad progression, spiritually speaking?
Okay, so we got two questions here, but first I need to make a minor factual correction. Shalom says that now in the U.S., some other penance can substitute for abstinence, meaning on Fridays outside of Lent. During Lent, you still got to abstain on Fridays, abstain from meat. That's actually not quite accurate. If you go back, and this is something all kinds of folks get wrong, the idea that if you don't want to abstain, you got to substitute some other penance. That is not what the church's legal documents actually say. Most people never go back and look up these documents, and most of the ones who do don't read them carefully, but I have. And if you go back and look at the implementing legislation that the U.S. bishops authorized in the 1960s, they don't say that you need to substitute another penance for abstinence if you don't want to abstain from meat. What they say is we hereby terminate the requirement to abstain from meat on Fridays outside of Lent, and we recommend that you either abstain or do something else, but they don't require that you do something else. So it's not the case that that other penances can substitute for the requirement of abstinence in the United States on Fridays outside of Lent. There just is no requirement to do a specific form of penance on Fridays outside of Lent. You're advised to do so, you're encouraged to do so, but it's not required. So having said that, let's look at the first question. Why did the church go from more severe fasting to notably less severe fasting? Well, basically, the fundamental reason is the church adapts its practices to the conditions of the time. And so conditions have changed over the last 2,000 years, and bishops have ramped up and ramped down various practical requirements of how we practice the faith. This is one of them. Now, if you're looking for a specific circumstance that has changed in society that would lead the bishops to decrease the amount of fasting that people need to do, I don't have an official source on this, but what I would say is it was industrialization. What you find is if you look in the Middle Ages, when they had the more severe fasting requirements, it was during a period where people had a fairly relaxed approach to work by modern standards. They, in fact, in some places, almost half the year would be holy days. And so they didn't have the kind of intense work schedules that we do now. But then, beginning in the 1700s, this industrialization started, and we got factories, and people started moving off the farm, where they couldn't just take a day off, and they had to show up for work every day in the factory and work hard in those factories, the dark satanic mills that they talk about in England. And you had to keep your strength up while you were working. You're using heavy factory equipment, you're running band saws and metal presses and all kinds of things like that. You got to be careful, you got to keep your strength up, you got to keep your alertness up. And that makes it harder for a lot of folks to fast, especially people who are not used to fasting. Most people here in the West historically would eat 3 times a day. Now, because of some recent very bad health advice, that some people have gotten. They encourage a grazing strategy where you're eating like 6 or 7 little meals a day. That's terrible advice. But historically, people would eat 3 times a day. You'd break your fast in the morning, which is where we get the word breakfast. You'd have a meal around noon, and you'd have another meal in the evening. And if you're used to eating 3 times a day, then your body will adapt to eating 3 times a day. And if you suddenly stop, then your body says, wait a minute, something's going on here. Food's not available. We better slow down our metabolism and ramp up the hunger at the same time to encourage him to go find food. So that would cause problems for people in factories to keep up their alertness and strength. And so you started finding more and more exceptions written into the church's moral and pastoral theology handbooks and canon law books and things like that, where it would say, well, you need to fast on Friday, but if you work in a job that would be dangerous if you did that, or you need to keep your strength up, then you can have some food. And more exceptions got written in. And eventually they just said, let's just diminish the requirement, because people today work job schedules where they can't just say, oh, today's a fasting day, so we're really going to kind of kick back and not spend a lot of energy. So I think that's the primary factor, industrialization, for why the requirements got less. Now, that actually wouldn't bug me because I fast every day except Sundays and holy days of obligation. I have 1 meal a day. So it doesn't bug me to be fasting during the day. But if you're used to eating 3 times a day, it will bug you. So I think that's the basic reason. Shalom then asks, is this a good or a bad progression, spiritually speaking? And I think that that's something people can have different opinions on. There's no magic level of fasting that all Christians are obliged to observe. Fasting is meant to, and like abstinence, is meant to help us grow closer to God. And so if more fasting would help us grow closer to God, then that would be a good thing to do. If less fasting would help more people grow closer to God, then that would be a good thing to do. You can imagine how in the age of industrialization, with all these folks working in factories, if they suddenly said, oh, we got to do a bunch more fasting now, well, that's going to cause a bunch of people a bunch of problems and could alienate them from the church and thus from God. So I think that that what you think of the current level of fasting, which I acknowledge is pretty darn minimal, is something that people can have different opinions on.
Shalom. Thank you very much. That brings us exactly to the break. So we'll take a very quick break. Back with more Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Carry the faith wherever you go. Catch up with the latest news from Washington, D.C., the Vatican, and the world on all of our EWTN news platforms, including EWTN News Nightly, the National Catholic Register, and the world over. Download the EWTN app at EWTNapps.com today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. When questions come from the internet, they also come with interesting names. I always enjoy trying to pronounce the names that people take for themselves. And sometimes I look at the name and I don't know. Is that the person's name that their mom and dad gave them, or is that the name they took? The next one comes from Raksuj 456.
I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure their family name is not 456.
No.
The rest of it, I don't know.
That's in the future. Well, people, you know how people ask, like, what was Jesus's last name? And you have to explain. Well, they didn't really have last name. In the future, it'll be like, what was Jesus's last number? And they're like, no, in the old days, people use names. They didn't just go by numbers.
Yeah, it's not like Francis 6 and Logan 5.
Logan 5. Wait, is Francis 6 in that movie? I do remember Logan 5. Is it the same movie, or are we talking about something?
I think it's actually Logan 6 and Francis 5.
Oh, yeah.
We're referring to Logan's Run for people who may not know.
One of the most important movies of the 1970s.
And in the books, there was the character Mary Mary 2.
Really? Two Marys, number 2. All right. Did the apostles? This is Rack Suge 456's question. Did the apostles think the parousia was imminent? That is, did they expect it within their lifetime?
Well, we have evidence that they did. One place that kind of hints at this is in Acts chapter 1, where after he's been raised from the dead, Peter asks Jesus, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? In other words, make Israel an independent kingdom again. And Jesus says, it's not for you to know what the Father has determined. So he points him towards the work of evangelization and says, don't worry about that. Now, that kind of hints that that Peter and the other members of the 12 may have been expecting the end of the world in their own day. But you could debate that because it's not as clear as it could be. But there's at least one passage later in the New Testament that is by not a member of the 12, but one of the apostles, the Apostle Paul, that indicates that he definitely expected, at least initially, that the second coming was going to happen during his lifetime. The letter is 1 Thessalonians, and 1 Thessalonians was written about the year AD 50. St. Paul had been traveling through Thessalonica and had made some converts there, but then there was a riot and he had to skedaddle and get out of Dodge real fast. And so he went to Athens. And because he hadn't had a long time to stay in Thessalonica, he didn't get to instruct the converts as thoroughly as he had wanted to. And that's part of what he's doing in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, is he's trying to catch them up on some things that he didn't have a chance to fully instruct them about or that they didn't understand. And one of them was the end of the world and when it's going to happen and what signs are going to precede it. And also various members of the Thessalonian community were concerned because they had loved ones who had died. And they were thinking, well, you need to be alive when Jesus comes back if you're going to be part of his kingdom. This was a misunderstanding that they had. And so St. Paul corrects them and says, no, don't worry about the dead in Christ. They're going to be fine. What he says, this is 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 16 and 17. He says, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with the cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. So it's like, don't worry about them. They're going to get united with Jesus even before we do. Then, he says, we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we'll always be with the Lord. So both the dead Christians and the living Christians, we're all going to get caught up to be with Jesus. And in fact, the dead will rise first, and then we'll get caught up. So you don't got to worry about the dead. But notice what he says about who's going to get caught up. We who are alive, who are left. So he's putting himself in that group. He uses the plural pronoun, first person pronoun, we. So he's envisioning himself as still being alive when the second coming happens. And so this is, I think, conclusive evidence that at least as of AD 50, St. Paul thought that the second coming was going to happen during his life. That's what he's assuming to be the case. Now, later, he realized this would not be what would be happening. If you read his last epistle, his last letter, which is 2 Timothy, he wrote that end of AD 66 or beginning of AD 67, shortly before his own execution. And so this is like 16 or 17 years after First Thessalonians, and he knows at this point he's going to die. He talks to Timothy in 2 Timothy about how I've run the race, I've finished the course. There's now laid up for me that crown of righteousness that the Lord will give me on Judgment Day, and so he knows he's about to die. He says, I'm going to be poured out like a drink offering. So he later came to understand that the second coming would not happen in his lifetime. And it was revealed to John that even the second coming was going to be significantly delayed, because in the book of Revelation, before the final end, there is this period of 1,000 years in chapter 20, known as the millennium. Millennium is just Latin for 1,000 years. And since 1,000 is a stock number, it may not be literally 1,000 years, could be a lot longer than that. In fact, the subsequent course of history would indicate it is a lot longer than that, because according to what I view as the best interpretation of Revelation, we're living in the millennium right now, and it's been going on for more than 1,000 years. So it's just a stock number. It means a long period of time. But by the time the book of Revelation was written, which was basically the second half of AD 68, it had been revealed that there would be this really long period of time before the end of the world. So there was an initial belief that it would be happening very soon, but by the AD 60s, it was being revealed that no, there's going to be a much longer period of time, and the apostles are not going to be living to see it.
What a great question, Rock Suge. Thank you very much for that question. This one comes from Megan War. Is it possible angels are actually saints from a previous iteration of the universe?
Okay, so this is a question that starts with, is it possible? And anything that starts with, is it possible, my first pass interpretation is going to be, could God make this happen? And my second question is going to be, has God said he's not going to make this happen? Well, okay, so could God have made a cyclical universe so that our universe is not the first? Well, sure, he could do that. There's no logical contradiction there. It doesn't involve a square circle or a four-sided triangle or a married bachelor. So there's no contradiction in the terms involved in the idea of there being a cyclical universe. And so God could have made a cyclical universe that had earlier iterations. Could God have preserved some creatures from that earlier universe into our universe, kind of like Galactus in Marvel Comics, because he started in the previous universe and then came through the Big Bang into our universe in Marvel Comics? Well, there's no logical contradiction there either. So God could have preserved creatures into our version of the universe that were from a previous version of the universe. Could those, since angels are created intellects, they don't have bodies, could God have preserved intellectual creatures from a previous universe into our universe? Well, there's no logical contradiction there. So I would say that today's angels, in terms of logical possibility, could be saints from a previous iteration of the universe. I can't eliminate that. Now, the second question is, like I said, has God said he's not going to do this? And no, God has not said that, not anywhere I know. It's not in the Bible. So I have to leave the possibility open that he could do this. But do I have any evidence that that's what angels are? And no, I don't. In the first place, I don't have any evidence that there was a previous iteration of the universe. So it could well be the Big Bang is the beginning of creation, and there were no previous universes. Secondly, the standard assumption and this is just an assumption. It's not something that's been proven, but this either by theological means or non-theological means. But the standard assumption throughout Christian history is that the angels were created as part of our creation. If you look actually in some Second Temple literature, like the Book of Jubilees, it talks about on what day of the week of creation were the angels and other spirits created. But that's something that it's non-canonical, so it's not really proof or anything, but the standard assumption has been that the angels are part of our creation, and the biblical authors don't really envision there being other creations. So I would say I can't rule out this possibility, but I also have no evidence for it. And I would tend to default to the standard Christian assumption that angels are part of our cycle of creation. And if there are other cycles of creation behind us or in front of us or beside us, I'll leave that up to God.
Megan, thanks very much. You want to take this next question, Jimmy? You think we can get it?
Sure.
All right. This one comes from Holly. Does a baptized person who commits a mortal sin lose all grace given to them by God until confession? I know baptism leaves an indelible mark. To me, it seems that there's a difference in grace between a non-baptized person who commits adultery unapologetically and a baptized person who goes to church weekly and prays regularly but consistently struggles with mortal sins, say of unchastity or drunkenness.
So Holly is... to answer Holly's question, basically, no, a person doesn't lose all grace given to them by God when they sin mortally and haven't yet been to confession. They do lose sanctifying grace, but that doesn't mean they lose other forms of grace. For example, they, over the course of the Christian life, may have built up good habits that incline them towards doing good things. And they don't lose those good habits just because they committed a mortal sin. They may have been much worse before they became a Christian and hadn't built up those good habits yet. Also, as she notes, baptism leaves an indelible mark on the soul, but more particularly, in addition to sanctifying grace, there's what's known as actual grace. Actual grace is what God gives us to help us do good things. And so, in fact, it's actual grace that prompts us to go to confession. So God's obviously still working in the soul of someone who has fallen into mortal sin and helping them repent and helping them go to confession and helping them do good things. So they don't lose all grace. In fact, there's a promise in Scripture. God says at one point to his children, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." So even if you fall into sin, God's not just going to abandon you. He's going to keep working with you. And thus, you don't lose all grace. You're still going to have actual grace that helps you get back into a state of sanctifying grace.
And that, Holly, is good news. Thanks very much for the question. There's, let me count them up, about a million more questions to come. It's Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin. All the questions are in from the internet. On this 4th of July. We'll take a very quick break and be right back with more Jimmy on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Thanks for being with us on this Independence Day here in the United States. Or I don't know if it's a holiday everywhere, but it is here in the United States. I'm pretty sure it's not a holiday everywhere. So if you're listening somewhere else around the world, maybe it's a Saturday morning in a lot of the world. So a happy Saturday morning to you. But this is our Independence Day in the United States. And so a lot of bunting, a lot of fireworks, a lot of hot dogs and hamburgers, a lot of beaches, sunscreen. What else? Darren, what am I missing for 4th of July? Should I say beer? I guess it's all right. I mean, what am I, a prude? Of course I could say beer. People drink beer on the 4th of July.
And according to you, there's a lot of bunting. So I guess baseball games are a little different on the 4th of July.
That's not the kind of bunt. I wonder what the relationship is between those two words. But no, I was thinking of the kind where it's red, white, and blue, like cloth that you hang on things. I don't know how else to describe bunting.
Just take note of the fact I just made a sports reference, and it was apropos.
It was. And they're probably somewhere, and there will be that kind of bunting today, too, because we play baseball in the summer. I mean, I don't play baseball in the summer, but people play baseball in the summer. I don't remember what I was even talking about, but happy 4th of July to you if you're celebrating that. If you're somewhere else in the world, we're celebrating it. So there. Holly, no, did I do this? Yeah, I did Holly already. I apologize. Audrey asks this. I have a friend with a topical allergy to water. She can drink just fine, but breaks out in hives if she gets wet. This is horrifying to me, Jimmy. I have never heard of something like that. Wow. I'm very sorry to hear that, Audrey. How would the church baptize someone with this condition?
Okay. So just for your edification side, this is a real condition. It's pretty rare, but it's called aquagenic urticaria. And the person can, as Audrey indicates, consume water, which is important because it's vital for life. And humans contain a lot of water. Otherwise, aliens, if they take all the water out of you, they can just turn you into a little cube.
Yes. Okay. Star Trek reference, original series, or Them Old Scientists.
Yeah. But there are some people whose skin will break out in hives and so forth if they get their skin wet. And so this is a significant challenge. In terms of how would a church baptize someone with this condition, one approach, really you need a medical consultation ahead of time to figure out, and she may already know, like if your friend has really a mild version of this, so the hives don't cause too much of a problem. It's not like she's going to go into anaphylactic shock or something like that. Then you could just do a baptism. But in order, if it's more serious, and then you'd want to do a few things. One of them would be limit the amount of water that's used, because there needs to be enough water so that it flows on the skin, but it doesn't have to flow a lot. And so you could minimize the amount of water that's used. You also could restrict where the water flows on your friend's skin, so that the hives are confined to a particular area. So that's what you could do on the baptismal side of things. But on the medical side of things, you could do some additional stuff, depending on how bad the condition is. Now, if it's pretty mild, like I said, you might just do the baptism, and she could, live with whatever temporary hives there are, assuming they're really, really mild and don't cause that much of a problem. If they cause more of a problem, you could treat the skin topically with something to counteract the allergy, like hydrocortisone. So you could get, say, a 2% hydrocortisone cream. They sell 1% over the counter in stores, but I've been told by a dermatologist 1% really won't do anything for you. You need the 2%, and that's available by prescription. So your friend might already have that, if she has this, just in case she gets wet, she might have some anti-allergy ointment or cream or liquid already that could be used to treat the resultant hives. It also could be injectable. I know when I was a kid, all poison ivy, and we got lots of poison ivy here in Arkansas, all poison ivy had to do every summer was look at me, and I would break out in hives. And every summer it would be the same thing. They would want to start with the least effective treatments, like calamine lotion. And they'd want to, Jimmy's got poison ivy again. And the doctor will say, let's put calamine lotion on it. And I'm like, no, hydrocortisone shot now. Because I knew calamine lotion isn't going to do diddly squat for this. So just give me the cortisone shot and it'll be fine. You also could use treatments prophylactically. So if you know the reaction is going to be bad, you could give a hydrocortisone shot or some other similar shot before the baptism, so that the allergic reaction is already going to be tamped down when the water is encountered. So there are a number of different options here, either treatment after the baptism or before the baptism, and minimizing the amount of water and where it goes. But there are ways that this could be handled.
All right. Thank you, Audrey, very much for the question. Jimmy, I got a jolt of anxiety after I said Star Trek because there is an episode of the original series where they dehydrate people, but also in the 1966 Batman movie, they used the dehydrator to dehydrate the United Nations people.
They did, and then they get their the crystals the people are made out of mixed up, and so the United Nations people come back speaking other languages than their native ones.
I forgot that part. But which one were you referring to? Were you?
I was referring to the Star Trek episode.
Oh, okay, all right. Because I thought, I might have missed that reference. Maybe he meant the Batman movie. A very funny movie because he has a bomb that. Do you know the part?
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
Yes. A great show. All right. Let's see. We got time for another question. Let's do this one from the Holy Ones 33. All right, Holy Ones. Thank you for the question. Did the Old Testament prophets know they were prophets, and did the New Testament writers know they were inspired when they wrote their books and letters?
So let's deal with the Old Testament situation first. Now, there were obviously some Old Testament prophets that knew they were prophets, and this is particularly what are known as the literary prophets. The ones who wrote books like Isaiah, Daniel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then the 12 minor prophets. And some of them actually talk about the fact that they're prophets. So they clearly knew that they were writing prophecy. There are, though, other figures in the Old Testament that are sometimes considered prophets, and it's not as clear. Now, for example, Abraham. You don't normally think of Abraham as a prophet. I mean, he did have visions, like when he makes the covenant with God concerning his descendants and things like that. But you don't normally think of him as a prophet. But he is described as one. At one point, he and his wife Sarah go down to Egypt because of a famine, and they. There are actually a couple of incidents like this, and actually, now that I think of it, this is not the one in Egypt, but they encounter a local king named Abimelech, whose name means "my father is king." So he obviously got his job by inheritance, since he's a king too. And he sees how beautiful Sarah is and takes her as a wife. But before they can come together, God comes to him in a dream and says, I know you didn't take her deliberately. That's why I've kept you from touching her. But you need to ask Abraham to pray for you, because he's a prophet. And so Abraham is described as a prophet. David is another individual who is not normally thought of as a prophet, but he wrote all these Psalms, which are inspired, and that led later individuals to regard him as a prophet. So I would say that many of the Old Testament prophets definitely knew that they were prophets, but there are other figures who might not have applied that term to themselves because they didn't function as a prophet in society. They didn't get revelations for other people on a regular basis. I mean, they may have had private visions, today, like Sister Lucia at Fatima, but she wouldn't be regarded as a prophet because she didn't function in this way in a regular, dependable social role. And there also were overlaps between prophets and other classes of individuals. There's one point where in the historical books it notes that prophets used to be called seers. And so it could be that an individual might say, oh yeah, I'm a seer, but they might not identify as a prophet because that term wasn't in use for what they were doing in their day. So that's kind of a sketch of the Old Testament situation. Now let's turn to the New Testament. This is a matter that's debated, and you will have various people say, oh yeah, none of the New Testament writers thought that they were receiving divine inspiration. They didn't know that they were doing anything special. And I just, I find that implausible as a global statement. Like if you look at the book of Revelation, it is clear, it is blindingly obvious that John knows he's doing a prophetic book, just like the prophecies in the Old Testament. And in fact, John is so familiar with the Old Testament prophetic works that, in Richard Baucham's phrase, he's actually got a book by this title. But what John is doing in writing Revelation is he is doing the climax of prophecy. So John, above everybody else, clearly knows he's a prophet. And there were other prophets in the New Testament era, like Agabus, for example. So John would have identified himself as a prophet. When it comes to the other authors of the New Testament, I think that the claim they didn't know that they were inspired is problematic for a couple of reasons. One of them is, like most of the New Testament is letters. And number one, the claim they didn't know that they were inspired is based on an argument from silence. And arguments from silence are notoriously weak because there's no place where they say, I know I'm not inspired, but they don't say that kind of thing. The other thing is, Paul does at one point say, I don't have a command from the Lord on this, but here's what I think. But that doesn't mean, but he also says, and I also think I have the Holy Spirit. So he's not saying he's not inspired when he gives his opinion. The other problem is even the letters of the New Testament are, by ancient standards, extraordinary. There have been studies done of the average length of letters in the ancient world, and they're like less than 100 words long. People did not write long letters in the Old Testament in the first century, and even famous letter authors like the Roman author Cicero, who is famous for his letters, his average letters are like between 200 and 300 words long. Then you look at the letters of the New Testament, and they are ginormous. Paul's longest letter is Romans, and it's like 58 times as long as a normal ancient letter. It's the Godzilla kaiju of ancient letters. Think about the Romans when they received it. They hadn't even met Paul. He'd never been to Rome yet. And then they get this just crushing monster letter from Paul. That must have made a really big impression on them. And so Paul knew this is a major literary production, and that makes it harder to argue. Given that he sees God as working through him, that makes it harder to argue that he would dismiss the idea that he was divinely inspired. And so all of the letters of the New Testament, even the shortest ones like 2nd and 3rd John and Philemon, even they're longer than average. And most of them are way longer than average. They're not all Romans kaiju letters, but they're really big. And so I think that the authors of the New Testament letters were aware, certainly I think it's very arguable that they were aware of their inspiration. Then when we look at the Gospels and Acts, they're clearly modeled off of the histories that we find in the Old Testament itself. And that suggests that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are trying to do history the way the Old Testament historical books were done. And since they regarded the Old Testament historical books as inspired, and they're doing the same thing, that would argue that they had an awareness of their own inspiration as well. So it's not something I can 100% prove in every case, but I think arguments that are dismissive of the idea that the New Testament writers were aware of their inspiration are quite flawed.
Holy Ones, thanks very much. We got to take a quick break. Right back with more Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
With news from EWTN's Vatican Bureau, you can watch all of the important events from Rome, even if you don't have TV access. Using the latest technology, we've made it possible to watch the latest news from the Holy See, all delivered directly to your home via live streams. Watch live on EWTN's YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest. All our questions are in. It's an internet version of, often we do the call-in shows, Ask Me Anything, and every now and then we do an internet version where we gather up some of the internet questions that have come in. This one comes from Rock Kaiser, 6841. How can heaven be eternal bliss and happiness if one of the members of our family, say one of our children, falls away from the faith and doesn't ultimately merit eternal life with our Lord and God? Most people look forward to reuniting with their loved ones in heaven. So won't we notice if one is missing and deeply mourn their fall from grace?
Well, the answer, this question comes up periodically, and the answer is we don't know exactly how this is going to work. What we're told is that in heaven, there will not be any more crying or tears or sadness or things like that. You know, the book of Revelation flat out says that. And so we can infer that if one of our loved ones is not with us in heaven, that we won't be sad about it, but we're not entirely sure why. That is a matter of speculation. It could be that we recognize that, we're going to have a broader perspective on things. So it could be that we recognize that, God did love this person just like we love this person, and they made their choice. They chose to reject God, which is to reject love, and God is honoring that choice. And so we may avoid the emotion of sadness because we recognize that everyone in this situation is getting what they wanted. The person who's not in heaven, they are getting what not just they wanted in life, but what they want right now, because our wills become fixed according to the church when we die. So if someone dies rejecting God as the source of love, they continue to reject God, and it would be cruel to force God on them when they choose not to be with God. So the person is getting what the person wants right now. And even if it's not what we would have chosen for them, we could still respect what they did choose. And, we don't have to think of this as, like the torture chamber image of hell, where God is having angels or demons positively torturing this person. They didn't choose that. That's it. Such images are meant to convey an aspect of what it's like to be without God, but they're not meant to be taken literally. So that's one way that it could be possible that we have a broader perspective. We recognize this person is getting what they want right now. And so that's one way it could work. There also may be a reconfiguration in how our wills and emotions work, so that that's why we won't experience sadness at this. There have been authors, and personally, this is not my preferred solution, but there have been authors like in the Middle Ages who would say things like, well, they're going to recognize that the damned are actually glorifying God by their damnation, that this is going to be, and the saints will recognize that the damned are bringing more glory to God by the mere fact that they're damned. And so they'll rejoice for that reason. Personally, I don't like that theory, but it is one that's out there. The bottom line, though, is we are told that we're not going to have sadness in heaven, and then how that relates to having a missing loved one is something that we just haven't been given enough information about to give a definite answer on.
Thank you, Rock. Thank you very much for the question. On we go to Daniel PG 3303.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Daniel PG 13.
That's a much earlier Daniel PG. This is later in the sequence.
Yeah, you gotta be 3,303 years old to see this movie.
Yeah, exactly. And there are just not many people seeing those. What is the current church teaching on evangelizing Jewish people? Also, does the promise of God to the Jewish people for the land still stand under the new covenant?
So with regard to the first question, well, the church teaches that Jesus Christ is the Savior of all mankind, and all people need to hear about Jesus Christ. So Jewish people need to be evangelized. Now, there are, particularly in the wake of Christian anti-Semitism that's happened in the past, and particularly in the wake of the Jewish Holocaust, there are great sensitivities regarding Jewish evangelization today. So Jewish evangelization has to be conducted with great care and concern and sympathy for the historical plight of Jewish people and the responsibility that some Christians had in causing negative aspects of that. But fundamentally, Jewish people are like all other people. They have a right to know the truth about the Savior, and so they need to be evangelized. When it comes to the second question about the Promised Land, the church does not have a teaching on whether God's covenant with the Jewish people still incorporates a promise to this particular patch of land. So Catholics can have different opinions on that. They could think that, Jewish people do have a title to this land, and that the modern state of Israel is a fulfillment of that promise. They could, and there have been Jewish people who've held this, that they do have a title to the land, but the modern state of Israel is actually not part of God's plan. It's something that happened despite God's plan. And then there could be a position held, and this is also held by various people in the Jewish community, that they don't have an intrinsic right to the land, but it makes sense for them to have the land given their historic ties to it. So it's not a matter of divine promise, but after the Nazi Holocaust, it could be argued, well, they need a homeland somewhere, and they have historic ties to this one. And so it's reasonable for them to have this land, even though they don't have it by divine promise. And then there could be a position that they don't have a right to the land and they shouldn't be there. So all of those, now the Catholic Church is going to support whatever solution leads to the most peaceful outcome for everybody involved. That doesn't dictate a particular solution, but what the Catholic Church wants to see happen is the arrival at a solution where both Jews and non-Jews in this area have a peaceful environment where everybody's rights are respected. But in terms of, do they have a promise, and how would that promise be applied in the current context of the modern state of Israel, those are subjects on which the church does not have a teaching, and Catholics can have different opinions.
Why would you need parental guidance if you're 3,300 years old, too? I don't see that, Jimmy.
Well, talk to Utnapishtim.
That's a good point. That's a good point. He might be one of the guys seeing this movie. All right, right back with more Jimmy Akin. Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron. Little bit of holiday groovy music for you there. It's a holiday here in America, the 4th of July, Independence Day. And we got Jimmy Akin with us. What a great day. Thanks for being here with us while we work our way through the questions. It's an internet open forum, and this one comes from Paul. It's a little long. I'd like to better understand the withholding of the cup, other than priests, during the Eucharist. Although I understand the logic behind the host containing body and blood, I struggle to get around the fact that Jesus specifically instructed to eat his body and drink his blood in two forms, not either or. Most Catholic apologists I've seen on the topic talk about the host containing both elements, but not the instruction of Jesus. Also, if we get both elements in the host, why do the priests still partake separately in both? If it's sufficient for the laity, why not the priests? This is something I'm struggling with and would love explained, as I want to live the way Jesus instructed me to do.
Okay, so I can't really speak to what other apologists you've heard have said about this, but, I have no problem addressing this. So there's a difference between the function of the laity and the function of the celebrating priest in the liturgy. That's obvious from the fact that the priest can consecrate the Eucharist and the laity cannot. So we have a distinction of roles here. And the distinction isn't between priests and laity per se. It's between the celebrating priest and everybody else. And what the church has discerned is that at the Last Supper, when Jesus instituted the Eucharist, he instituted the 12 as priests, by telling them, do this in memory of me. He was telling them to repeat this sacrificial act. And so it's priests who offer sacrifice, and therefore Jesus was telling them to offer sacrifice. And that means, according to the historic understanding of this, that they need to participate in the fullness of the act as the celebrants. So the principle is the celebrating priest does need to receive under both kinds. And this is actually in canon law. And canon law says that a priest, if he's not going to receive under both kinds, he is not to do this. And he is not to celebrate the liturgy. He must receive under both kinds based on the instructions that Jesus gave to the 12 as celebrating priests. And it actually uses in Latin the strongest word, nefas, which means under absolutely no circumstances is anyone to ever deviate from this. So the church's law is very serious about this. Now, there's a distinction, though, between the role of the priests who are celebrating and everybody else who's at the Mass. And at the original Last Supper, it was just the 12, so far as we know, who were, or maybe a little more than that, but it was basically the 12 who were present. And so we don't really have, based on this, an application to people who are not the celebrating priest. That's something that the church has discerned over time. And what it's discerned is that even though it's absolutely necessary for the celebrating priest to receive under both kinds, it's not absolutely required that that everybody else who's at the Mass receives under both kinds. You can, based on the fact that the entire Christ is contained under in each element, you can receive the entire Christ through either one of the elements, and it's not absolutely required that someone other than the celebrating priest receive under both kinds. The fact the celebrating priest needs to is based on the fact that that he's doing the service, and that this is a sacrifice, and it depicts Christ mystically, his body and blood in separation, and that's part of why it's a sacrifice. And he, as the guy celebrating it, needs to participate fully in it, but not everybody else needs to. So as a result, it's not absolutely required that ordinary Mass attendees receive under both kinds. It is encouraged these days that they be offered communion under both kinds, assuming there's no special reason why not to, but it's not required in the same way as for the celebrant. So you'll notice in that I've been talking about the celebrant, the celebrating priest, but there are other priests who may be involved. You could have, even though you may not commonly see this, there can be other priests present who are attending the Mass like a normal person, like a normal member of the laity. And they're not up on the altar, they're not vested, they're not taking part in the celebration, or at least they're not functioning as a priest. Sometimes in some situations, they may even be functioning as like an altar server or something. And if that's what they're doing, then they're not required to receive under both kinds. They could receive only under one kind, because they're not functioning as the celebrant. So the distinction is between the celebrant and everybody else. And the church has discerned that the celebrant is required to receive under both kinds, absolutely always, but non-celebrants, whether laity or clergy, are not absolutely required to receive under both kinds.
All right. Thank you very much for the question, Paul. I appreciate that. I hope that was helpful to you. Samuel wants to know this. What makes the Immaculate Conception, bodily Assumption, and perpetual virginity necessary for salvation. I mean that in a theological, not ecclesiological sense. It cannot just be fidelity to the magisterium and tradition, right? There has to be some deeper theological reason for their necessity. So what essential truth about the gospel do I deny if I deny these three dogmas?
Okay, so there are several things there that I guess I'd comment on. One of them is you often hear Protestants claiming that things like the Immaculate Conception and bodily assumption and perpetual virginity should not be necessary for salvation. And those Catholics are wrong for saying that they're necessary for salvation. And therefore they're distorting the gospel, which they equate with the message of salvation. And there's several things wrong there. The first one is that they're misunderstanding what the gospel is. The gospel is not how do you get saved. The gospel is that God is instituting his kingdom in the world through his son Jesus Christ and his death on the cross. That's what the gospel is. How you get on the good side of God and get saved, that's related to the gospel, but it is not what the gospel is. You'll notice that, and I actually have an episode of the Jimmy Akin podcast about this, but you'll notice that John the Baptist and Jesus, they're preaching the gospel before Jesus even goes to the cross, before anybody knew Jesus was going to go to the cross. And yet they're preaching the gospel. So what that tells us is the gospel is not principally about how you get saved. It is about God's kingdom. Now, eventually, it's in fact, it's even called the good news of the kingdom. Now, eventually it gets revealed that how God is instituting his kingdom is through his son Jesus Christ and his death on the cross. So that becomes part of the gospel message, but it's still not about how you as an individual get saved. What that is a separate subject that is obviously of interest because we want to be saved, but it's not the gospel itself. People who portray the gospel as the message of salvation do not fundamentally understand how the word gospel is used in Scripture itself. So, what can we call the message of how to get saved? Well, in Greek, the word for savior is soter, and so the study of salvation is often called soteriology. And there are certain things you want to know as part of soteriology for how you get saved. Like you want to have faith in Jesus, you want to repent of your sins, you want to be baptized. Those are all aspects of soteriology, which is distinct from the gospel itself. And these beliefs about Mary, like Immaculate Conception, bodily assumption, and perpetual virginity, those are not necessary for soteriology. Those are truths of a different branch of theology called Mariology, and they are not truths of soteriology. So they are not, properly speaking, part of the message of how you get saved. But that's true of lots of elements of theology that are outside of soteriology. Like, for example, the Bible indicates that God has created angels. And that's not part of soteriology either. That's a truth of what's of a branch of theology called angelology. So there are multiple different branches of theology where God is or doctrine where God has revealed stuff that are not part of the message of soteriology, and these Marian beliefs are not soteriological in nature, and it's a mistake to present them as if they were. But Cy Kellett,
Jimmy Akin,
has God revealed the existence of angels?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And if you were to reject belief, knowing that, if you were to reject belief in angels, would you have faith in God at that point?
No, not as I understand faith. No.
No, because faith is the theological virtue by which we not only believe in God, but believe everything God has revealed.
Yeah.
So if you rejected belief in angels and knowing God has revealed them, and if you thus rejected faith, would you still have salvation?
No, you can't reject the faith.
Under ordinary circumstances, no, you wouldn't. So you need to believe in angels, not because angels are part of the gospel and not because angels are part of soteriology or the message of how to get saved, but because God's revealed them. And if you reject what God has revealed, you're rejecting faith in God, and that's what's endangering your salvation. And that applies not just to truths of angelology that God has revealed. It also applies to truths of Mariology that God has revealed, and truths of all the other branches of theology. So do you need to believe in the Immaculate Conception, bodily assumption, and perpetual virginity of Mary? Well, not because they're related to salvation, but because God has revealed them. And this is not a uniquely Mariological thing. It's a mistake for our Protestant friends to say, "Oh, why did you make these doctrines part of the gospel when they have no native connection to soteriology?" Well, it's just God has revealed this, and we need to believe it for that reason. The same way that angels are not connected directly to the gospel or soteriology, and we need to believe in angels because God has revealed them. So do you need to believe in these things? Yes. If you reject them knowing that God has revealed them, will that jeopardize your salvation? Yes. But that doesn't make these part of the gospel. It doesn't make them part of the message of salvation. It just makes them part of that body of truths that God has revealed, and we need to accept them because we have faith in God and what he reveals.
Thanks, Samuel. Got to take a break. Right back with more Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
EWTN, communicating the faith.
I want to thank you very much for what you have done for us these years as we converted to Catholicism 2 years ago, and you had a huge influence on us, the information that we got from you. So I do want to say a huge thank you for this show.
So I'm listening, and I'm a new listener to this station, and I'm actually going to get a lot of friends to listen to this station. I'm so excited.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy mentioned the episode that he did on What is the Gospel, a wonderful episode of the Jimmy Akin podcast. Just want to let you know where you can get it. Anywhere you get your podcast, that's where. Just look for the Jimmy Akin podcast. Or you can become a subscriber to Jimmy's channel on YouTube. And it provides Jimmy an opportunity to go somewhat deeply into these mysteries of the faith. And there's a real basic one. What is the gospel? And check it out. As I said, wherever you get your podcasts or on Jimmy's YouTube channel. Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, our guest for the hour, and we've got a whole bunch of questions from the internet for him. This one comes from Rebecca, and Rebecca says, when my father was dying, he began speaking to family members who had already passed away. Does that mean they're in heaven, or could they still be in purgatory? If one who should have shown up didn't, does that mean they didn't make it?
Okay, so well, first of all, Rebecca, I'm sorry to hear about your father's passing. Your father was experiencing what's known as a deathbed vision, and I have, as I believe you know, an episode of Mysterious World on deathbed visions and the research that's been done on them. It's a very common phenomenon. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it does happen to a lot of people who are dying. And in deathbed visions, they commonly report seeing either departed friends or loved ones or angels coming to help them make a transition into the afterlife. Now, of course, some deathbed visions may have purely natural causes, and in conventional medical science, it's been assumed for a long time that all of them do. But there are examples of deathbed visions where people get information that they had no natural way of knowing that turns out to be true, even though it goes well beyond what random chance would indicate. This is what's known as veridical information. And that indicates that there's something more serious than just ordinary natural causation happening here. If people are getting information that turns out to be true in a way that has no natural cause. So I think a lot of deathbed visions should be taken as what they appear to be. Now, I can't say they all should be, but I think a lot of them should be taken as what they appear to be. Your loved one is talking to people on the other side who have come to greet them and help them transition into the next life. And many of these may be family members or other friends that they've known during life. But I don't think that we can, well, let's deal with the first question first. Does their appearance in a deathbed vision mean that they're in heaven, or could they still be in purgatory? Well, I think that the odds are that they ended up in God's friendship if they're showing up in a deathbed vision. St. Thomas Aquinas was of the opinion that a damned soul could show up by God's special permission and let manifest to the living somehow. But we don't have good evidence of that happening in deathbed visions. These tend to be pleasant, comforting experiences where they're saying, okay, we're going to help you make this transition now. And we don't have any evidence of damned souls doing that. So I would say the soul would need to be either in heaven or on the way to heaven as part of the purgatory process. Could they be in heaven? Sure. Can I eliminate the idea that they're still in purgatory, that they're still having some purification going on? No, I can't eliminate that. I don't think there's any way to determine for sure where a spirit who died in God's friendship is unless they just tell us. Like St. Thomas Aquinas' sister, when he had an apparition of her after she died, she said, I need your prayers. And he asked, okay, happy to pray for you. How about my two dead brothers? And she said, oh, they need your prayers too. And then she shows up again in a second vision and says, thank you so much for the prayers. I'm in heaven now. So is one of your brothers, but the other one still needs prayer. Okay. In that case, Thomas Aquinas' sister said what state they were in, but unless they say what state they're in, I don't think we can know for sure one way or the other. They could be in heaven, or God could have them still being purified. In fact, helping fellow family members make the transition could be part of their purification. So can't be definitive on that question. Second question, if one who should have shown up didn't, does that mean they didn't make it? Well, my first question would be, how do you know who should show up in a deathbed vision? We don't have any promises about family members are going to show up. They do according to the data, but we don't have any way of, some people just get angels. Other people, they get family members. Other people, it's like one friend shows up, but we have no way of predicting who should show up in these deathbed visions. And so I don't think we can look on the failure of anybody to appear as an indication that that person didn't make it. It just that, well, they didn't appear. They could have been busy with something else, or maybe they're being purified right now and they're not welcoming people into the afterlife now. I don't think we can draw any inferences about people who didn't show up because we have no way of predicting who should show up. We could make guesses, but guesses are not the same thing as solid predictions. So I wouldn't infer anything about people who didn't show up.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I don't even know how people plan things if they're on the other side. I mean, did they forget to put it in Outlook? Maybe they didn't even get an alert that they were supposed to show up.
Yeah, Outlook is terrible to begin with. I don't trust it in this life. I wouldn't trust it in the afterlife.
Yeah, if you're using Outlook in the afterlife, you didn't make it to where.
If you find yourself using Outlook in the afterlife, that's a sign you may be in hell.
All right. This next one comes from Jas412. Is everything planned by God, or are there any coincidences?
Well, it's going to depend in part on what you mean by coincidences. Now, the roots of the word coincidence are co, which means together, and inside, and not inside as in inside a house, but meaning basically two things that occur together. And any two things that occur together can be called a coincidence. But usually people, given the way the language is developed, they mean something that doesn't have a meaningful cause. Like if I show up at the store and you show up at the store and we both show up at the same time, but we didn't plan to, well, our showing up at the store was a coincidence. It turns out that our appearances at the store coincide with each other, but there was no meaning to this. It just happened that way. So the question is, does God plan everything in a way that would attribute special meaning to every time things coincide with each other? And I would say that's an open question. One of the things that classical Christian theology has recognized is that God uses secondary causes in the world. And given that, he could, set up gravity and electromagnetism and everything so that it runs most of the universe on its own, and there's no special significance to most events in the world. When he intervenes to do a miracle, that's where you got special significance. But just because it rains on a particular day, that doesn't mean there's a message from God that he's sending to us. It could just be coincidence based on, well, this is how he set up the hydrological cycle on the planet Earth. And so today is one of those days where it happens to be raining, and that's going to help the crops and the trees and all the things. But that doesn't mean we should see a special message there other than, God's providing care for the world in the way he normally does. It doesn't mean there's anything beyond that. So that's a position that is open to individuals. Not only does God use secondary causes like nature in his governance of the world, he also gave us free will. And so that means that we can make choices for things that will end up coinciding. And if I make a choice to go to the store and you make a choice to go to the store, and we made the choice at the same time and we both show up at the store at the same time, that doesn't mean there's any special significance to that. So I think that one certainly can hold that there are coincidences the way that don't have special meaning. But God is playing infinite dimensional chess, it can be argued. And so he may have planned things that, like we see in Genesis, when Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery, they meant it for ill, but actually God meant it for good. So God was working out a purpose here that none of the human agents were aware of. And you could propose that God not only does that, but he does that all the time. And there's always some special purpose when things coincide. Okay, you could propose that, and I have no way of disproving it. So I also think it's possible to propose that there are no coincidences in the sense of everything has some meaning to it, whether we discern it or not. On the other hand, if that's the position that someone takes, I will have an immediate piece of advice for them of a practical nature, which would be, don't try to figure out all the meanings, because it is just like Joseph's brothers and Joseph himself before the end couldn't have figured it out. There's lots of things that God might have purposes for we cannot figure out, and if we try, we will either be mistaken or drive ourselves crazy.
Jas, thanks very much. Thanks to everybody who got questions into us, and we will do it again, so do not despair. If your question came to us via the internet, we'll get it. We will likely get to it at some point in the future. Jimmy Akin, thank you for at least digitally spending your 4th of July afternoon with us, at least according to the memory of the computers that holds all this stuff. Thanks very much, Jimmy.
My pleasure, and happy 4th, everybody.
And happy 4th to you, Jimmy. And that will do it for us. Don't worry, we'll do it again, God willing, next time, right here on Catholic Answers Live.